UFC on June 14th. It's going to be June 14th next year. And they're building an arena. The great Dana White's building an arena. And they're going to have 8 or 9 championship fights, the biggest fights they've ever had. Everyone's a championship fight. And everyone's a legendary type of fight. He's actually holding back fights right now for 6 months so he can do it for this, for 250. I think 250 is going to be amazing. 8 or 9 championship fight. Everyone's a championship fight. Everyone's a championship fight.
So during the main card of UFC 326, all 6 fights that will take place at the White House were announced. And well guys, here is another Fell For It Again award to add to your collection, because this card fell embarrassingly short of what was promised. 8 title fights? Nah, the best the UFC can do for you is Bo Nickel versus Kyle Dawkins and Ayman Zahabi, who is essentially being sacrificed so that Sean O'Malley can get a highlight reel KO in front of the White House event crowd. And I mean, if we're talking about sacrifices, since the White House event is going to be attended by only VIPs, you can rest assured that there will be a lot of overlap with a certain special someone's list. And all those VIPs will definitely be quite familiar with sacrifices, if you get what I mean. But leaving that aside, the White House card, or as the absolutely tasteless marketing team decided to end up calling it, UFC Freedom Fights 250, isn't a bad card. If we were to judge it by the modern standards of the UFC, this would be considered a pretty stacked numbered event. You've got 2 title fights, with each of those title fights involving a bona fide star in Ilia Topuria and Alex Pereira. And while the only truly 50-50 fight on the card is Pereira versus Gane, fights like Rufi versus Chandler and Lopez versus Garcia are almost guaranteed to end in highlight reel finishes. But if we are to judge this card based on the standards of what everybody expected it to be, a generational card, one of the greatest cards of all time, with every single fight being between champions and legends of the sport, then this card fell spectacularly, embarrassingly short. There's no super fight we all wanted to see between pound for pound greats. There's no crazy name value on this card that will send shockwaves throughout social media like there was with UFC 200 and the return of Brock Lesnar. Hell, there isn't even a third title fight on this card like there was with UFC 217 or UFC 300, even if that fight was going to be Kayla Harrison versus Amanda Nunes. For a fight card this special, taking place at such a unique location that the UFC will never be able to go to again, this card just shows that the UFC is now no longer capable of living up to the hype. And when taking into consideration how bad and understacked the first third of the year has been for the UFC, this looks even worse. So in today's video, we're going to go over every single fight on this card, examine in detail why they are underwhelming, and what this failure means for the UFC. But without further ado, let's get started. So starting off at the bottom of the card, we have Diego Lopez versus Steve Garcia. Now, I actually wouldn't hate this fight if it wasn't on this card. This fight makes sense rankings-wise. It's between a former title contender and a guy on a 7-fight win streak, with 6 of those 7 wins being by KO. And if this fight was the featured fight on a numbered card or a co-main event to a stacked fight night, I would absolutely love it. But Steve Garcia just isn't a big enough name for what should be the most stacked card of all time. And to explain why exactly he isn't, I'll just let you know that 5 of those 7 wins in his win streak took place at the Apex. And yeah, sure, he main evented in one of those, but Steve Garcia is literally going from the UFC's warehouse, which is where they put fights that they know won't be able to sell out an arena, to the most historic fight card in the history of the sport. Steve Garcia is a fun fighter, but the name value just isn't there. I also think that Diego Lopez will absolutely destroy Steve Garcia. Although he's lost to Volk twice, there's no shame in that, and the way he beat up and put away John Silva is incredibly impressive. In contrast, Steve Garcia's recent wins are over the decaying corpse of Calvin Kattar, who he took to a decision, and David Onama, who honestly shouldn't have been ranked anyways. Steve Garcia also has a win over Melquizael Costa, but that was all the way back in 2023, and Costa has evolved a lot since then. Garcia also hasn't fought anybody with the grappling threat or finishing potential of Diego Lopez, which is why my prediction for this fight is Diego Lopez by round 1 submission or TKO, with him taking down Garcia like he did John Silva in the first round of their fight, then actually finishing him instead of just 10-8ing him. I could see this finish coming due to 12-6 elbows or even a triangle from Mount, but it's likely going to be quick and violent. The only thing that makes me worry for Diego's chances is that this is a rather quick turnaround from UFC 325, and he broke both of his feet in that fight. But if he is healthy, he should win this. But anyways, let's move on up the card to a fight that truly is a waste of space. And that fight is Bo Nickal versus Kyle Daukaus. And man, this fight just shows how little the UFC tried or cared with this card, because while I have nothing against Bo Nickal or Kyle Daukaus personally, neither one of these guys should be a part of what should be the greatest card of all time. And yeah, sure, Bo Nickal was on the main card of UFC 300, but that was because the UFC was trying to force him down our throats as the final representative of All-American Wrestling, which of course all ended when he got brutally struck by Rainier de Ridder, who then himself went on to get TKO'd by Brendan Allen. I mean, look at it this way. If Bo Nickal hadn't been on UFC 300 and didn't have the wrestling accolades he had, and didn't have the support of the Midwestern wrestling boomers, he'd be just another unranked middleweight. He'd probably be one of the better unranked middleweights for sure, but I don't think he would beat someone like Ikram Eliskerov or even Bruno Ferreira. And then Kyle Daukaus. I mean, I love you, buddy, especially for what you did to the buffoon Michel Pereira, but man, we seriously have him on the White House card. The White House card. And while Kyle Daukaus is on a 3-fight win streak and has improved a lot since he was cut from the UFC and came back, he's basically here as a sacrificial lamb for Bo Nickal, so that Bo can get a win and give a shout out to his audience of Midwestern boomers and also praise the Trump administration on the mic. And to be frank, I don't think this fight is going to be that entertaining either. I think Bo is going to beat Daukaus by a boring decision, where he either tepidly outstrikes him like he did Paul Craig, or just controls Daukaus on the ground, because I don't see Nickal KOing Daukaus or submitting him, since Daukaus is pretty defensively responsible on the feet and has a background in jiu-jitsu. If we were judging this fight solely by the impact it has on the division, this fight wouldn't be out of place on the early prelims of a numbered card. It is only here because it feels like it has to be here because of Bo Nickal. Now, we come to the first fight on the card that I would call a ritual sacrifice to Moloch, similar to what happened in the files. And that is Mauricio Rufy versus Michael Chandler. Now, I just hate this fight because Michael Chandler deserves absolutely nothing from the UFC at this point. Sure, I think a lot of the fan base felt bad for him since he waited for that fight with Conor for so long and never got it, but at some point you need to realize that it just won't happen and cut your losses. Michael Chandler is 2-5 in the UFC and is currently on a 3-fight losing streak, and his last win is over the decaying corpse of Tony Ferguson back in 2022. 2022! It is now 2026, and Chandler is still somehow getting a shot up the rankings against Rufy on what should be the biggest card of all time. And on top of that, this guy lost to Paddy Pimblett, who just got beaten to a pulp by what was the worst, slowest, and sloppiest version of Justin Gaethje that we have seen yet. At this point in his career, Michael Chandler should be fighting Alexander Hernandez as the co-main event of an Apex Fight Night, because that's where he is at in his career. I mean, the pick is obvious. Mauricio Rufy by first round KO or TKO, and I'm hoping that it's a brutal, flatline KO that has Michael Chandler getting stretchered out from the octagon, because you just know that he's going to cut the most over-the-top, lame, cringe-inducing, fake WWE promo if he even gets within a mile radius of the microphone. And just imagine if he somehow wins. The only way Chandler could win is by fluke, like Rufy snapping his arm or Chandler miraculously chinning him with a 1 in 1 million overhand. But man, it would be unbearable to hear him call out Conor McGregor yet again. And I mean, Rufy is a fun fighter, but as I've said before, is he really worthy yet of being on what should have been the most stacked card of all time? I don't know, maybe if he was fighting someone like Charles Oliveira or Max Holloway, or even an out-of-retirement Dustin Poirier on the lowest fight of the card, that would have made sense. But man, This fight will probably be fun because we will all get to see Chandler get put out in front of the Big Don, but it shouldn't be happening in the first place. It shouldn't be happening at the White House, and Michael Chandler is going to be obnoxious as hell, win or lose. Now moving on up, we have the featured fight, which is between the industrial plant himself, Sean O'Malley, and the 38-year-old Ariel Helwani lookalike in Ayman Zahabi. And well, this is another fight that will be a ritual sacrifice to Moloch, because unless Zahabi finds a way to smudge O'Malley up against the fence and knee him in the thigh for 3 rounds, he's going to get chinned. Ayman Zahabi is old, arguably lost to Marlon Vera, nearly got finished by a washed Jose Aldo, and is simply a step down in competition from O'Malley's last opponent in Song Yadong. He's just another sacrificial lamb to help give O'Malley the chance to sing happy birthday to
Brazil's
Goodest Golem on the microphone after the fight, if it can even be called that. And while I actually think that Sean O'Malley is a good fit for the White House card, since he actually was a champion, is a top-ranked contender, and technically has a win, in quotation marks, over the current champion, Ayman Zahabi is just the wrong dance partner here. This should have been Corey Sandhagen instead. Corey Sandhagen is an American and is a far more competitive and interesting stylistic matchup for Sean than Zahabi is. He's also a former title challenger and may be familiar to some casual fans since he actually fought for the belt against Marab in the co-main event of Pereira's match with Ankalaev. And, speaking of Pereira, and now, we finally get to a fight that is befitting of the White House card, which is Alex Pereira versus Cyril Gane for the interim UFC Heavyweight Championship. This fight is the only fight I am genuinely hyped for on this card, since the majority of the fights on this card are just uncompetitive squash matches. This is an interesting and competitive fight, especially since this is the first fight that Alex Pereira, a former middleweight, is taking up at heavyweight. There's major legacy on the line here, since this is the chance for Alex Pereira to become a 3-division UFC champion. And even if it's just an interim belt, Alex has the potential to make history here. I think Alex Pereira will KO Cyril Gane, since I do think Pereira can match Cyril's speed and will have the power and accuracy advantage despite being the man who is moving up, and will also have the lighter man skill advantage here. This is the only fight I have no major complaints about, although, as I will get to later when we discuss what should have been booked for this card, I do think this fight could have had a bit more star power behind it, if you get what I mean. Now finally, we have the main event, which will consist of Ilia Topuria sliming out 37-year-old Justin Gaethje and leaving his corpse slumped on the octagon canvas. Ilia Topuria is an enormous favorite over Justin Gaethje, and it makes sense why he is when you look at how their fights have aged. Ilia Topuria destroyed Charles Oliveira in the first round, who went on to dominate Mateusz Gamrot and Max Holloway, and who also beat Gaethje back in the day. And Ilia also was the first man to KO Holloway, who picked apart and then slumped Gaethje. And I mean, this is okay. I think both Topuria and Gaethje are legendary fighters that are deserving to fight at the White House. But do I think that this fight could have potentially been better? Yes. And I especially think that is the case after looking at the circumstances behind this fight's booking that we will get to next. So now that this disappointment of a card is finalized, we can be absolutely sure that what Donald Trump said here,
He's actually holding back fights right now for 6 months so he can do it for this, the 250.
was either a lie or misunderstanding on Trump's part, or a lie on Dana's part. And you can tell that this is the case because back when Trump was saying this, Ilia Topuria's return was still uncertain because of the custody battle he was having with his ex-wife. And well, now Ilia Topuria versus Justin Gaethje is the main event, even though Justin said here that just a week before the card was announced, he was told that he would not be on this event.
2 days ago, I got a call and they said, "You're definitely not fighting on the White House card." So I was like,
Wow, really?
cool.
Okay.
And then yesterday I got a call and they said, "You might hear something. You might be on the White House card." And I was like, "How are you going to go complete 180 turn on me?" And then today I found out that I was on it. I didn't know if I was main event.
Really? Oh, so it was a big secret. Even the fighters really didn't know.
Now, what this leads me to suspect is that Ilia Topuria versus Justin Gaethje was the backup plan for a different fight, and as Ariel Helwani has reported recently, Ilia was offered a fight with Islam Makhachev and a fight with Justin Gaethje, and Ilia chose Islam. But then Islam Makhachev turned it down due to a reported hand injury. which, side note, is kind of annoying because that means that Islam Makhachev likely won't be back until July or August at the earliest, but hey, there's not much that can be done about that. However, Ariel also reported that Ilya originally wasn't supposed to be on the card, which leads me to suspect, and I might be overthinking this a little bit, but that the actual original plan was this: Jon Jones versus Alex Pereira for the vacant undisputed heavyweight championship at the White House as the main event, and here's why. Just a week or so before this card was announced, Jon Jones announced that he was negotiating with the UFC to be on this card. However, after the card was announced, he ended up crashing out on Twitter, asking for his release, and filming himself crying on Instagram Live.
I'm so pissed off.
And as he says in this post calling for his release from the UFC, he states, quote, "After everything I've given to the UFC, the years, the title defenses, the fights, hearing that I'm done is disappointing. Especially when, as recently as Friday, UFC was calling me trying to get me on the White House card for a much lower number." And while Jon Jones is a violent criminal who is known for his prolific lying, Jon's statement about the UFC wanting him for a much lower number is corroborated by Ariel Helwani's reporting on his potential pay, where Ariel says that Jon Jones was asking for a figure similar to what the UFC offered for him to fight Tom Aspinall, which was $30 million. But the UFC instead offered him $15 million, which is the now infamous sum of money that the UFC paid Conor Benn, a sort of middling star in boxing, for a single fight. This is just my guess, but based on what has been happening in the UFC heavyweight division in the past few weeks, I think this is how things went. The UFC wanted to book Jon Jones versus Alex Pereira for the vacant heavyweight strap at the White House, but two things got in the way. First, Tom Aspinall signed with Eddie Hearn's management agency, which would cause massive PR issues for the UFC if Tom were to have gotten stripped. If Tom had had his belt taken away from him, Eddie Hearn could have pushed for Tom Aspinall's release, and since Francis Ngannou is now signed with Most Valuable Promotions, we could have seen Tom Aspinall versus Francis Ngannou on Netflix as a potential fight. And second, Jon saw the number that the UFC offered him and was deeply offended at a personal level. From the UFC's perspective, they might have been willing to deal with the annoyance that is Eddie Hearn after stripping Tom Aspinall if they had been able to suppress the already exorbitant costs of the White House event. However, Jon didn't take the $15 million offer that the UFC gave him because he felt deeply undervalued by the UFC. And look, Jon Jones is a narcissist with an extremely fragile ego, which is why he is crashing out on IG Live and also why he ducked Tom Aspinall in order to preserve his undefeated legacy. However, he's also correct here in not taking this offer. If the UFC only offered him $15 million, then they really do truly undervalue him. Because while I hate Jon Jones, and I'd like to make fun of him for being a steroid cheat and a serial violent criminal, he is nonetheless one of the UFC's biggest draws. And by offering him $15 million, you're basically saying, "Hey Jon, you're officially considered the company's greatest fighter of all time, and your status as the official company GOAT makes you worth the same amount as Conor Benn, a minor boxing star with some pull in the UK boxing scene." It's probably not the dollar amount itself that hurt Jon's ego, but rather the idea, the notion of being worth as much to the UFC and Dana White and the TKO group as a relative no-name like Conor Benn that did. And if the UFC really, truly wanted to have a big fight to headline the most special card in the company's history, they should have forked up the $30 million right then and there. Because now, instead of having Jon Jones versus Alex Pereira, a matchup between stars that defined entire eras of the sport, you have a complete squash match between Ilia Topuria and Justin Gaethje, headlining what should have been the biggest card in the history of the sport. And while I personally am happy that Jon Jones got screwed over and is now crashing out, which I think is hilarious by the way, the bigger villain in this story is the UFC and TKO Group Holdings. TKO doesn't care enough about the fighters, and even fighters who they marketed as the GOAT of the sport, to get them on what should be the biggest spotlight in MMA history. And they don't care enough about the fans to find ways to get those matches made. The only thing that TKO, as a publicly traded company, cares about is the bottom line, which means that convenience and cost-cutting measures will always take priority over spectacle and stardom. And that is why all of this matchmaking for the White House card is taking place at the very last minute. It's because they wanted the cheapest possible option. And look, the underwhelming disappointment that is the UFC White House card is a consequence of the UFC's lack of care or appreciation for its fighters or fans. And they're only able to get away with it because the UFC is a monopoly. And I'm telling you guys, it will come back to bite them in the ass someday. But anyways, that's the end of the video. I know I'm being overly negative towards the UFC recently, but I just genuinely think that things have been on the decline for a few years now. And I'm afraid that stuff is only going to get worse from this point onwards. So yeah, thank you for listening and goodbye.